always feels a little extra to me. But anyway, Henry, and was it Noah? Was your name? Great to meet you both. I don't know if you were part of the other group a long time ago, but yeah.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Cool.
Looks like Daniel dropped off. I didn't know if he wanted to introduce himself.
Actually, I'll stop sharing my screen for a second just so we can kind of like talk more normally. All right. I'll try to be on screen too for a second. Whoops, I just screwed myself up here. Oh, I'm all over the place. All right, I'll be on camera for a little bit. I'm gonna probably be off camera to try to reduce my, oh, I forgot I'm like in the national park or something right now. But hi, I'm Jesse. And hi, welcome back, Daniel. Yeah, maybe we should just like introduce everybody, like the general introductions, because I kind of know some people, and yeah. But
Here he is.
I can start because I'm the link between the two groups somewhat. My name's Amanda. I did my master's in philosophy at Western, and now I'm part of the Orthogonal Research and Education Laboratory. And I am in this reading group because I wanted to read this book, and so I asked some of the smart people in my life if they also wanted to read this book, and now we're here.
Great.
I guess I'll go next.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Jesse. I think what my title is now, something like research coordinator at Orthogonal Research Education Lab.
Yeah.
I do a few things. I have a day job that's not like in health tech. I've do some other stuff. I run the Cognition Futures like subgroup in Orthogonal Lab, and also I realized I was so excited that Amanda brought this up on her own because it was sort of like a book that I semi already loved, like Norbert Weiner and his ideas, and then I read some of the book and never finished the book. And I kind of also made a society ethics technology team at Orthogonal Lab too, which is just a small collection of people that occasionally get together and like collaborate, usually from different backgrounds. So I'm kind of critical of ideas, and that's so that'll be that I'm fully putting my bias out there, and hopefully it'll be constructive in a way where I'll be that guy, so you guys don't have to be that guy. Great. And I think I know Daniel from the reading group a long time ago. I know Bradley because he's my PI, but you guys can go next if you want.
Yeah, I can introduce myself. I'm Daniel, master's in philosophy from Western Michigan. I teach there as a part-time instructor now, mostly into Phil Mind, Phil Cogsci, and some Phil Bio.
I'm Bradley Alisea. I'm the head of the Orthogonal Research Lab. I have a PhD in cognitive science and in computational biology. So, I've been interested in cog science for a long time, and sort of thinking about it in different ways and linking it up to other things. So that's kind of what I've been doing. We lead a number of different groups in the lab, ranging from like developmental biology to the Cognition Futures group, which is something Jesse has been driving forward, and so is Amanda. And then, we have different groups. So if you're interested, we dropped an invite to the Slack if you're interested in that. And that's kind of the gateway into a lot of the things that we're doing. So if you have any questions about the lab, let me know, and I can help you out with that. Or Jesse, I guess, too.
Yeah, and same goes like emailing Bradley or myself. For people, if it's ever is like online, like, oh, people reading about this and you wanted to talk more about it, you can reach out to us that way. So potential future visitors, nice to be stopping by. Thanks for stopping by. But I do know we're kind of going to try to keep this to like an hour tight. So I'll defer to Amanda about how you want to set anything else up. But really great you're all here. I don't think I have since Morgan probably won't be joining us, so we probably won't wait for him to show up, I guess, Amanda.
He said he is held up right now.
Okay.
So maybe he'll be able to join, maybe not. Cool. I wanted to just start with the preface, even though it was super short, because I think that there's still plenty to talk about. And also, since it's the first meeting, we can talk about our hopes and dreams with the book. So I guess the one question I want to have like left the meeting kind of having a good answer to is, what does contingency mean? And like, what is the idea of a contingent universe? The title of the preface. I guess that's, I wanted, Jesse, if you just jump in whenever the things you found in the introduction are like particularly relevant. Cause I think I read the introduction when I first like downloaded the PDF. I don't know if any of you guys read it. But I don't have any thoughts to share on it.
Yeah. I think I will jump in. Like I'm kind of experimenting with Jamboard, so bear with me. But like I took a few things out. Is it showing it on the screen though? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a few quotes that I'll pull from it. Like to tease a few things. I guess I'll just say. I appreciate, the sense of critiquing the escapism that was mentioned, and escapism as it's basically a reference to mathematics or pure theory people saying, "Oh, I don't have any, our hands are clean, we're not involved in anything." And Norbert's like, "Well, maybe not." And it was really cool. I thought it was interesting. I'm curious if Norbert goes into this, but like the one on the right on the right side, for him, technology is viewed not so much as applied science, but rather as applied a social or moral philosophy. I haven't seen it said that way before, so that was cool. I only have a few slides here, but I don't know if it's right to go through them right now versus just kind of going through the notes, the preface, and interjecting as necessary. I might play it that way. And I can use this. I was going to basically have this screen here if need be, but I don't have to be sharing all the time either, so we can kind of see what works best.
I'm okay with the text on the screen.
Okay, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I guess the first question is, what does contingency mean? So skipping right to like the very end of the preface, something that is still an open question for me, and I hope that I think it will be explained in more in future chapters, just looking at the titles. But the measure of probability is called entropy. That was pretty fast. Not exactly sure what that means. I guess I do understand what he means when he says that, like, the states with the most order will be least probable and chaos is most probable. But that connection between entropy and probability, I felt like I'm not fully understanding that.
This goes back in some way to information theory. So I'm actually going to give a lecture on that. I'm still prepping it, but there's this idea that information entropy, as opposed to thermodynamic entropy, is like a matter of probabilities. So I think in our cognition futures group, I mentioned that, like, if we take like a set of states and we observe them over time, we can get the information, say, for that set of states over time. So if you think about a weather forecast for the week, and the weather is the same every day, there's very little information in that forecast because it's always the same. I could pick any one day at random and say, is this what's the state? And I could be right. If the state changes a lot, that means the probability is low that you get any one state. then there's a lot of information because I don't know what the next state is. If I can predict every state, then there's nothing to worry about. The probability of knowing what that is very high. So that's kind of the idea behind information theory and probability. I'm not really sure what he's saying about like order, but I guess if you think about that sequence as order versus disorder, in other words, if it's easy to predict a state, that would be order. And then if it's not easy, it's disorder. It's like sort of chaos or the edge of chaos or whatever. And so I guess that's what he means by least probable, that those states have no value. Like, and this is what I'm going on based on like information, my understanding of information theory in 2023, not like Weiner's knowledge of it whenever he wrote the book in the 60s.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of my understanding of it. That's how I would state it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I just I'm hoping to hear more like defense of the view that pieces of like that like self-organization is limited and temporary, and looking at that last paragraph, like self-organization is the exception rather than the rule. Because if we like look around us, there are self-organizing things. There's all different kinds of life. There's self-organization all around us. So why, like in light of that, why should we think that it's the exception and not the rule?
There were some interesting talks about that in the preface. I'm going to try to find them. I mean, I don't know if you think this is in the preface or the introduction. I mean, but like the bit about like this is a quote that's been referenced a bit, but just like to give some flavor to his views, perhaps, but not actually. There might have been a little bit more here too about that. Yeah, this is kind of maybe slightly relevant to that, but basically couching some of Weiner's stuff in terms of how this would start to affect biology, and this whole bit about the pregogene.
Pregogene, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is kind of why I was gonna. We talked a little bit about like von Forrester's take on demons, and I think why I had this here, which is really just easier to put here, I suppose. Whoops, yeah. I don't know if we wanted to have any discussion about like this comparison to Maxwell's demon or another demon discussion we had recently in the group too, if that would have any use of discussing that in the context of Amanda's question.
Yeah, I don't want to like go through the details again, but I guess that's why I'm wondering why self-organization is supposed to be the exception and not the rule, because in like von Forrester's demons, so I guess that came after this, so that's like a idea in second order cybernetics that's probably like 20 years after this book. But so maybe that's it. Maybe that's the answer to my question. But this other cybernetics guy, von Forrester, explains how you can get order from noise. Noise being disordered energy. So it's energy. It's still something, but there's no order. And so he explains how. I mean, he kind of explains it. He attributes the actions to Maxwell style demons. So I guess that's not so much an explanation, but on one level it is. He explains how you get self-organization from cheap undirected noise and like energy. So I'm interested in this this Gibbsian idea in light of that, I guess.
I think this is going to sail off. The satisfying answer, probably sail off into like statistical mechanics and like some of the work that people have been doing in complexity theory. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think. I also think it's maybe worth thinking about whether all these people agreed with one another, because
Right.
I don't know. Von Forrester may not have agreed with this very easily. I mean, it just really depends. It was I don't know how contentious their group was. They had the group. What was it? The
The Macy's stuff.
Macy conferences. So I don't know how contentious those were. They may have been. They probably were somewhat contentious. So
Yeah. Let's see, what else did I have anything up here for this? My next thing of this was just some political stuff, and I kind of there was a strong set of changes between the first and second edition. The first is a bit more unfiltered and is like heavy-handed criticism of like some like fascism, and I think some of those letters are still included in the appendix to this book. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't read the appendix either.
That's fine. We don't like. I don't think we're focusing on that too much. There was some interesting stuff in. I don't know. I'll just say this now. I guess there's some interesting stuff in the introduction about the mind brain duality and thus the long-standing mind brain duality was overcome by materialism, which encompassed organization, messages, and information in addition to stuff and matter. But the subjective, an individual's cumulative experience, sensation, and feelings included the subject of experience of being alive, is belittled, only seen within the context of evolutionary theories providing information useful for survival to the organism. So there's sort of this this isn't really strongly talked about in the introduction, but there's sort of this it's interesting that like this concept's mentioned and then maybe a little more explicitly taken on some cognitive science stuff, and as it looks like we kind of talk about here too with Gibbs, and then also some specific reference of Gibson and Gibsonian ecology to kind of pushing this forward. And this is Hines. What's his name? Himes. This is Himes' words and not necessarily Wiener's in the introduction, but it's basically dragging cognitive science and saying how cognitive science, in quotes, which is sort of how I use cognitive science too sometimes, entirely ignores background topics of culture, society, history, subjective experience, human feelings, and emotions. Thus, it works for the highly impoverished models of what it means to be humans. And then it mentions Taylor and also James J. Gibson providing as these like useful challenges and critiques. So that was a nice sort of interesting connection, between all of what happened. My part of why I'm here at all is like what got me down the road of doing some of the research that I'm doing now, and even going back to school and everything, was like I was kind of mystified. Well, what happened to cybernetics? And I feel like I'm finally getting a bit more of a full picture between this and some of the second order cybernetics work, and even the stuff in Fuchs we're looking at of like where did it go and how did it get there, and what's how would Norbert view like the cognitive science project in that sense, and some context here about that. The last thing was just the conclusion was basically, it's hard to believe the conclusion of the second edition, or republishing the second edition in 1988, was interesting commentary about like democracy and capitalism and making projects and all this stuff. So I think that's mostly what I took from it. I may mention a few other things from the introduction ahead, but we'll return to the notes document.
Yeah, it's interesting that Gibson is described as like a reaction to, maybe reaction isn't the right word, but Gibson is contrasted with cybernetics. I don't know if that makes sense. I thought the mention of Freud was funny. It was real quick, but I appreciated it. I liked that he dropped that and then just says, "I do not wish to press this point." But I think that the parallels between like paradigms in psychology and this kind of like systems science are interesting. One thing that he was fast with there in particular was the relationship between rationality and determinism. Because if he's talking about incomplete determinism, indeterminism, and then the irrationality of Freud, and that was fast.
Oh.
Like I see the relationship between determinism and contingency. That I think that was explained pretty clearly, but rationality seems like a separate entity.
So, can you give a definition of contingency?
The way I understood it, and I know the context is like Gibbs's physics, which I don't fully understand, but basically, like the universe could have been otherwise, and in order to talk about things that happen in the universe, we have to talk about other possible worlds.
And how do you think that that relates to what we were talking before about probabilities?
When I was an undergrad, I took a couple philosophy grad seminars, and one of them was philosophy of cosmology. And the term paper that I tried to write, not knowing what a term paper for a grad seminar even was, and not having much guidance from the professor, I tried to write about like basically how to talk about probability when talking about possible universes. And I kind of want to find that paper because it was almost certainly just like absolute nonsense. And I don't think that's just because I didn't know what I was talking about. I think it's really, really hard to talk about probability when it's really hard to talk about possible worlds, possible universes. I feel like philosophers throw that around pretty loosely sometimes. Like nearby possible worlds versus further away possible worlds.
I think physicists do too, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, good question. I don't know. Maybe I figured it out in undergrad in that term paper.
Do we have anyone else who wanted to give that a shot? Okay. So I guess the reason I'm interested in this idea of contingency is because it's a term people use not just in like this context. I mean, he's using the example from physics because he's talking about this, this energetic entropy and things like that. But people also talk about it a lot in development and in evolution. So, contingency being like where you have a lot of paths that you can take from like a common ancestor, from like a single cell to, shape an organism or shape a population, shape a species. And, there are a lot of different paths where depending on the history of the system or history of the lineage or whatever, there are different things that happen. And so you have what you might see in evolution. You might see a phylogeny or a tree, and that tree represents these points where there's a division, a split of like a population or a split of like developmental fate or whatever. And I'm kind of mushing in like development and evolution here, but the idea being is that you have this possibility space of all of these different possibilities. As possibilities come from all these different things that get put together in different probabilities. So in evolution, you get things that are conserved, but you also get like mutations and recombinations that occur at a certain rate. And then those get retained at a certain rate, in the population, or in development, it's within the organism. And then that's your, probability that will be the right path, as you get selection, as you get other things happening. And so you get this huge, what they call, possibility space. And, out of that, you get this path that emerges, which describes the thing that you're looking at from an origin point to the final state, at least what you're looking at. It's not necessarily a final state in evolution or in development. In development, you can have a final state of development, but it's, it changes over time as the individual evolves. I mean, it is very abstract, but basically it's this idea that things unfold according to a set of like things that happen in the history of the system, history of the organism, history of the population, their influences that push it in one direction or another. And then that trajectory can be represented by a tree or in like a landscape where you have this path. And those contingencies are understood to be kind of like the things that shape whatever it is. So in evolutionary biology, there's this idea of contingencies of different traits, like, this species or this set of organisms is contingent upon something happening in the past, some selection event that happened in the past. And so then it has maybe this trait that allows it to synthesize a certain type of chemical in the environment. Or, you could have a situation where in development, there's a contingency of like developing eyes. And then if you have your eyes, then you have vision. If you don't have light sensors, then you don't necessarily have vision, at least not in the way that you would see it in other related organisms. So, I mean, there are different things like that. I think a contingency is sort of these probabilistic events. Sometimes they're just things that have to be in place in order for something else to happen. But that's why they talk about probabilities. And in this case, he's talking more about like statistical physics again, which is like, doesn't have anything. It's just kind of like you have a bunch of balls that get released. They're popping around in a bin because they're excited by energy. They start to cool off, and then which ones are, which states do they settle into? Well, that depends on the history of the system. If the heat is evenly applied, if you have, various chance events that push it in one direction or another, and then you get all these states that happen. And then we can maybe post hoc, draw a map that says, okay, all these, balls kind of settled into their states after the entropy happened and the heat in the system died down. How did they get to that state? And then we have to explain, okay, this happened at a high probability, so the balls ended up in this configuration versus another configuration. And you can draw a tree, you can draw like a potential map. That's what he's getting at with the probabilities. It's basically all these things in the history of a system that contributed to its current state. And you don't know these for sure. You have to infer them. You can observe them sometimes, but a lot of times you're just making an assumption.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that helps me wrap my head around it. But there's still something. So it's easier to think about contingency in evolution and development when you can like see examples of when different paths were taken. But when talking about other possible universes,
Yeah,
like what other paths could have been taken. We like don't have the same kind of reference point, maybe. Yeah, I feel like I still lose it when we're trying to think of the direction that our universe has gone in relation to what, like other universes. How do we compare? How do we like identify the forks in the path?
Well, the idea is like that we have gravity and we take it for granted, but there is maybe a precursor of gravity that wasn't like the specific gravity that we had. Well, on different planets, you have different gravities. So, you could think of like on Earth, not even universes, but just on Earth, we have a specific gravity of like 1g. And then you go to another planet and the specific gravity is higher, and it's because the planet's bigger or, more dense. And then like that difference is, so the planet it formed to be a certain shape. It's a rocky planet versus a gas giant. So it has a certain size. And then that determines the gravity. It could be that the planet may have, maybe it would have evolved to be much smaller. And so then Earth might have a lower specific gravity, if Earth evolved to be the size, developed to be the size of the moon during its formative years, we would have a much lower specific gravity. We probably wouldn't be here talking about this, but my point being is that you have these parameters that get tuned in, like if you're talking about a universe. I mean, the idea is that you have these things like, different chains of events. So there might be a universe where everyone's talking backwards and walking backwards, or there might be a universe where we're all kind of like upside down with respect to our own view of the world. There are a lot of different potentials, and those come from like some hypothetical like ancestral state of the universe that where the alternate universes split off and they have different values for the maybe like different types of ways gravity works, different values for that parameter.
So this is an ignorant person's question, because my only background in contingency is in Phil Lang. But like, I guess in defense of Amanda on possible worlds being confusing for me as well, like there seems to be some sort of incongruity between evolution and like space, insofar as like we have something like mutation as a concept embedded into the process that seems like distinctly not a part of like the development of solar systems. So like, is that something that we should be worried about? Because yeah, you mentioned probability. I guess like that is the moment where I'm like, yeah, this seems like an event that isn't measured by probability because it is literally random or something like that.
Well, I mean, yeah, it depends on how, like, I guess it doesn't need to be probabilistic. It just needs to be like if something goes in one direction versus another. So like with gravity, it's just like, do you have a universe where gravity operates the way it does, or does it like, do we get anti-gravity in another universe? So it's not really probabilistic. It's just kind of like, do we get this type of event versus this type of event?
It's like a fork. It's like a possible fork. And I guess that helps me articulate my confusion, which is I feel like we're limited in, like, we can look at our universe and we can observe a bunch of different forks and we can theorize about them. And we can look at all the like dimensions of variation within our universe, but I'm not sure how we can come to any conclusion about the realm of possible worlds by looking at the particular dimensions of variation in our own world. Like, yeah, maybe gravity looks different in another, possible world. But it just, I don't know a better way to say it other than this kind of becomes nonsense really quickly to me.
Yeah.
I feel like kind of the fruit, what kind of sticks out from all of this for me is basically, we didn't really talk, I don't know if we mentioned path dependency specifically, but it's almost like in the concept of things being downstream of certain choices, like the existence of gravity the way it came about, or like the way here the way that there was a slow transition from being not an oxygen rich environment towards a more oxygen rich environment over time. Like certain, I think there's sort of a, at least like a questioning in context of our universe happened to develop a certain way, or our planet even developed a certain way. Well, like there are certain like uh, things that had path dependencies to them, and that okay, life was easier to start in the water because there was less, you know, it would potentially, it was easier, or why was it easier? Because there was a source of, you know, heat that was protected from the sun, and then like the ozone layer wasn't there, and all these things. Like, and but point being more like broadly that there's certain, what stands out is sort of the concept that things maybe things are sort of relatively determined by a concrete history that has been in place, but perhaps questioning what those priors, if you will, or those like developmentally baked in things, how they could have been different and how that could generate a different present environment, um, in a bigger picture sense. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I feel like we're swinging a bit towards like metaphysical stuff almost, or like really big zoomed out things. And I think cybernetics is a little bit oriented towards a smaller, slightly smaller scale somewhat. But I think that those I don't know, components are relevant, I guess. um
Yeah, I guess so on page 8 at the very last few lines, it was the merit of Gibbs to show for the first time a clean-cut scientific method for taking this contingency into consideration. So I guess if that's possible, and if that's the context he's developing his thoughts in, maybe a lot of this is just irrelevant. If this idea of contingency is something like well described by Gibbs.
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, I think it's like, if you want to talk about statistical physics, sure. And then what I talked about with evolution and development, that's like a thing that we kind of are, that's not a perfectly described way of describing it, I guess, is because I mean, you have like people have thought about the problem, but it's like, well, how do we characterize? Obviously, there's some sort of contingency, and then people describe contingency, and then they say, okay, this is how, we can hang it on like a series of events unfolding a certain way, but we don't ever like observe these events, so we only know this from inference. So it's not like something we can like nail down perfectly and say we have this. In Gibbs's case, you have like sort of this idea of an idealized distribution and all these things that you kind of can make assumptions about. In other fields, like in statistical physics, that works for you, but in other fields, it probably doesn't. And so, like, that's the problem, is that, maybe that's a problem maybe for this whole concept. Your system has to evolve in time. You have to think about it from a temporal standpoint. If you're just thinking about a static system or something that pops in and out of existence, then maybe you can't say anything about contingency.
yeah.
I also would say, yeah, the concepts. One of the things maybe we should do in this group is like some of these concepts, like kind of nail down definitions and figure out our kind of own way forward, because there are a lot of different definitions of it, and I don't think people really have. I don't think things transfer from one field to another at all, like definitionally.
Right. I think it's interesting that the last bit of the preface is this footnote about how it's possible that things don't translate to the biological realm easily.
Hmm. Okay.
And it looks like he gets into differences between living organisms and machines in the next chapter. I mean, I'm sure that'll be a theme of the whole book.
Yeah. We only have like 15 minutes left or so. And I don't know. There's a few things here. Like I don't know if we fully covered. And we kind of talked about the demons a little bit in this, I suppose. Is there anything else in these note sheets? I don't know if anyone wrote anything here. No. Anything else in the notes we kind of missed in this section? I have a couple of general questions. Yeah, I would. My general questions for people would be like, what's like? I'm curious to hear people's background about like, what brought you to wanting to read, look at this book, and like how familiar are you more interested in cybernetics or the philosophy? Are you more interested in like the cognitive science implications? Like, kind of what are people's sort of agendas or motives for looking at this stuff specifically? Like, what lens do you want to bring to it, if applicable? I'm just curious about that. I can start with that by saying a lot of the things Bradley just said are super relevant to my own interests, in part because we've kind of written a couple papers about it. Like those things, like one was called like embodied cognitive morphogenesis as a route to intelligent systems. Like these things that are looking at embryogenesis, looking at these like environmental and developmental contexts. Like that's something that I'm particularly interested in. As a broader conceptual thing, but also like I'm really curious about like as I've noted, I'm kind of a slight Norbert Weiner fanboy, and like seeing someone who came up with some of these ideas and some of like the staunch like openness, even just like the openness that he had about like not one of the earlier people that I've known, and obviously like there's a reference to like Oppenheimer here, and other people too. But people took cybernetics into many different directions, like Claude Shannon and Ashby, and a lot of like the people down the road wanted to use it in different ways. And Norbert kind of, said he's like, no, I don't want to go that way. I don't want to be part of the governmental machine. I want to do this stuff. And the way I'm really curious to dive more into what he saw, and like how much it applies nowadays, I guess. So that's a bit longer maybe than I intended to speak for, but I'm curious I'm curious about other people's like backgrounds in that sense too.
I'm looking forward to the ethics side of this. Like, what does this indeterminism in physics have to do with like the real use of real technology and its development in the real world? And I guess I'm not skeptical of the ability of scientific language and like the metaphors that are used to make sense of things. I'm not skeptical of the impact that can have on like the cultural narrative and our self-conceptions, and like the impact that science can have on our cultural narratives, I guess. But I do want to. I'm excited to see those dots connected better.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Like that was touched upon a bit in the introduction, and even that stuff about like applied moral and social
right
philosophy. Like, okay, yeah, like is that Is that explicitly talked about much, or is it like the author doing a really nice, really pretty sounding summary? We'll see.
Okay. So I don't know much about cybernetics. I came across a mention of it in a book a little bit ago and realized, like, I've heard this word. I don't really know what this is. But so I have no background. But more broadly, yeah, I have some interest in like philosophy of cognitive science that tries to think of like, approaches that think about like whole systems and like working some environment systems. And so I like sort of the, I guess, broadness of it. But it mostly, honestly, like I've heard of this thing, but I don't really know what it is. So let's see.
Yeah.
Right. And you're really familiar with the like 4E kind of cog sci, and I think that there's interesting both like overlap and then points of contrast between cybernetics insofar as I know anything about it, and the 4E stuff insofar as I know anything about that.
Yeah, that was a point of interest, and I didn't say because I'm not. It's yet to be seen to me like what the overlaps with the 4E stuff are. I assume they're there because that's where I hear about it. But yeah, that is a like big level of interest of mine to see like the overlaps and like divergences from that.
I would note that this book is kind of the sequel to Cybernetics, the original book. Oh, am I like off screen? Did my computer drop out? Sorry.
It's still sharing the notes and the PDF.
Okay, that was like a weird screen. Anyway, but like, yeah, like this, I wonder how much, I don't really know how much this book will get into like what cybernetics is. I think it does somewhat, but I feel like this is very much an applied, like, look at like what's, I don't know how to say it. Like it's, I think this is basically a seminal work. And like if you look at like Norbert Weiner's Wikipedia page, it says he's one of the first programming ethicists. I feel like that's like a really, really, really early term for like AI ethicist or technology ethicist. So I feel like this is, I think, commenting mostly on that. But I think it would be great to have discussions as we go through this, like what is cybernetics? What is it talking about? Like what's the good regulator theorem? Why does it matter? Or like maybe even like how did, if we know, and I don't know that much, but like how would Ashby or Shannon or other people answer this differently, and like the different paths that information theory took stuff in. Like I'll be interested in that for sure, and also obviously, like definitely comparing to what we now call 4E cognitive science, and kind of as a slate plug, we're doing a bit of a project on like where is cognitive science now, and like we looked at a question from a critique of Francisco Varela, who was a proponent of embodiment and stuff like that. And the critique was sort of did quote unquote 4A cognitive science actually embrace embodiment enough? Did it go in that direction? Why not? But what were the limitations? What was Varela trying to do at the end of his career to make it more empirical, to make it more functional? And that's stuff we're looking at in with the conditioned futures group a little bit. But I digress, and I'll offer anyone else to comment on the questions of your lenses or motives or anything interesting we can kind of focus on that would make us tour through this book more fun or interesting to you.
Well, if no one knows nothing about cybernetics, I'm
not sure how much.
You can go, Daniel.
Oh, sorry, my internet's bad, so
Yep, you can go.
You can also type in the chat if
Yeah.
you're having problems with the connectivity.
Cutting people. But yeah, so not sure if we're.
Oh no, you're in and out, Daniel. Now it looks like you're muted.
All right.
Yeah, sure. Should I type it or just speak it?
I can hear you fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll throw it in. Oh, Daniel already threw it in. Well, there you go.
Let's. Not sure how much we'll get to talk about here, but I'm interested in the difference between Gibbson's notion of information and Shannon info from information theory. Yeah, I think that's a great topic. We've kind of covered that lab a little bit, and it's always great to go over that difference because I'm still processing it. We had some nice conversations recently, but good stuff to do. So I'll put that point down here, and you can go, Henry.
Cool. Yeah, I have no dog in this race. I do ancient philosophy mostly, so not this. I'm interested in the discussion of contingency. I'd say I have broad interests in like what this book has to say about biology as well, but like mostly I guess I'm interested in this social aspect that's going to be involved throughout, it seems. Yeah.
Cool.
This other book that Noah and Daniel and Henry and I are reading does connect, Aristotle to information theories loosely. So maybe that'll be more relevant than you think.
I gotta know the book's title. I gotta know now. What is it?
I mentioned it. It's The Dynamics of Acting.
Oh. Wait a second. Is that the one by like
Chuarero?
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I remember the cover of the book. Like it's like red or something and like some I don't know. Okay. I don't know. Okay, cool. Also, I think I kind of know why, but I'm curious, Bradley, why are you here? Just because I dragged you into this group?
No, I of course interested in cybernetics and
Yeah.
definitely want to kind of keep on top of that. And actually, I think that's interesting that Daniel's interested in this Gibsonian and Shannon information concept because we've done work on that. So we have a paper that we've done and actually two papers, but we want to develop that further. So that's something maybe we can do as well and revisit some of what we're doing there. And it's an interesting thing because this is a certain view on like information and thermodynamics and regulation of systems, and then Gibson has a kind of a different take, and you can actually kind of find interesting fertile ground there between the two, and even combining the two in a lot of ways too.
Mhm.
So some things that Gibson is talking about that Shannon, because Shannon information theory is not really, it's designed for like telegraph lines. That's basically what he built the theory around. And it's been applied to much different fields, but it's not really. So there's this thing about probability. Well, probability works great in telegraph lines and making them efficient, but like in a lot of other systems, it doesn't mean anything. So you have to kind of shape your problem to that model, and that you run into problems there. So with Gibson, it's like you have a lot of interesting ideas that kind of resolve maybe some of those problems. And so, yeah, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I'm just interested in seeing where this goes too. You know.
Yeah. No, I'm extremely grateful that I stumbled upon the lab, because in my undergraduate stuff, I was interested in like this kind of thing called cybernetics, and there was a cognitive science minor, not a major, a minor in the linguistics department at my university, and I could never get into it, and I did a little bit of stuff, and like I worked for a semester in a neuroscience lab and some other like computer stuff, and it was just all these like, it's really hard to find anything that felt like a place to talk about this stuff. So Proudly's been it's been so nice to sort of have an umbrella under which to look at these things in a more coherent way. And I between that and like finding how I met Amanda and also Avery, who isn't here, but it's kind of always the angel on my shoulder, or like the theorist on my shoulder. Like back in the day reading, I think it was like Varella's book or something, and that kind of dovetailed into everything we're doing now. So it's a really fun journey. But yeah, we're based at the top of the hour, and I know I'll probably be interrupted in a very few minutes by the disembodied voice saying that live streaming is now over, to our fake live stream. But yeah, I think that's it on my end. I'm really happy to meet everybody and looking forward to next week. I guess we want to read chapter 1 for next week, or what are you thinking, Amanda? I'll just pass the mic to you about that.
I was thinking every other week.
Okay.
First of all, which might be a little slow, but I don't know. There's no rush. So 2 weeks from now, and yeah, I was thinking just chapter 1. It's a bit longer. It might be more, just like by my quick skim, it might be more, I don't know, less philosophical, I guess, and more context. But I think it will help answer some of our questions.
Okay. That's great for me. I'm all for like slow pod on old school Norbert Weiner ethicist writing. It's like a great. I posted on Twitter about being accepted to like a graduate program or something, and asked for advice about some things. And like one was like, well, yeah, make sure you have hobbies outside of like what you do normally, and like talk to your friends and take care of yourself. I'm like, okay. So
my hobby is philosophy.
My hobby is going to be reading ethics books from Norbert Weiner in the 1950s and 60s with my friends. So it's a friend activity, right? When like, okay. But anyway, no, that's great. I'm happy for that. Any other comments by anybody else? I may invite a couple other people. Hopefully Morgan will be here next time, and some other folks, but I think it'll be a nice sort of low-key discussion, and it's been nice so far. So I'll leave it at that. And so thanks everybody for showing up.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda, for like spearheading this. This is like it's great. It's gotta be someone who's not doing it, because I have to do this for other stuff, and it's like, hey, so thank you so much, Amanda, for all this so far.
Yeah, I'm glad you all were interested.